Wander Wealthy Podcast, episode 76 with Kristyn Ivey. Hello, friends. Welcome back to another episode of the Wander Wealthy Podcast. My name is Tess Wicks. I'm your host, and today we have a wonderful show for you. I am joined by my guest, Kristyn Ivey. We have a pretty fun little background. I met Kristyn at a coffee shop in Chicago that kind of doubles as a co-working space. It's a place I used to do a lot of teaching. I would teach people how to start podcasts, how to make money from podcasts, and how to build content calendars and all of that good stuff. And Kristyn attended one of my talks. So that's kind of how we met. And then she ended up interviewing me on her podcast, which I'll tell you a little bit about. And then she became a member of the Money Program, which is my online 6-week money coaching program. It's more of a group coaching and sort of a do-it-yourself program if you're really looking for a comprehensive way to get your finances in order. And Kristyn was very interested in taking the program. So she is one of the original members. When I was just starting it out, she helped me out a lot, actually, by giving me really great feedback. So we've had a long history together, and you'll hear a lot about that in this interview. But as a formal introduction, I'd love to tell you a little bit more about why I find Kristyn so fascinating and why I wanted to have her on the show. So she is actually the founder of For the Love of Tidy, which is her KonMari Consultant company. So she works with people as a professional organizer, and she's dedicated to teaching the busy families and professionals and creative entrepreneurs how to let go of their stuff and attract a truly abundant life. So she is Chicago's first certified KonMari consultant. If you haven't ever heard of the book, The Life-Changing Magic of Tidying Up by Marie Kondo, that is the book that has basically invented this KonMari method, which is this way of organizing your home and also just tidying your almost entire life. She, like I said, works as a professional organizer, a KonMari consultant, and works with people on tidying their lives. And when I got to go on her podcast, which she co-hosts, it's called the Spark Joy Podcast. It's a weekly podcast where they celebrate the transformative power of surrounding yourself with joy and letting go of all the rest. I got to go on and we talked about tidying up your finances and the idea of what tidying can do for your life, more than just tidying your home, but tidying all these other aspects of your life. So we talk a lot about that in today's show. And I just thought that you guys would really love to hear Kristyn's story with money, but also with this whole other aspect of life, which is organization, tidying, and it really naturally leads us into a much bigger picture of why are we doing all of this finance stuff? Why are we doing all of this organization stuff? And it's all about that personal development and, figuring out what is truly meaningful to you, what brings you joy, aligning that with your values and figuring out your priorities, and then making decisions confidently from there. So that is my introduction to this episode, and I know you guys are going to love it. So let's get on into it. Here is episode number 76 from the Wander Wealthy Podcast with Kristyn Ivey. Kristyn, welcome to the Wander Wealthy Podcast. I'm so excited to have you on the show today because we have kind of a fun history, but I've already talked about that. So let's dive into you. I want to hear more about your personal story because I introduced you as the KonMari consultant in your business, but I'd love to know where you're at in your life right now and how you got there and kind of your story around life and money and business and all of that good stuff.
That's such a great question. Thank you so much for having me on, Tess. My money story starts as probably many money stories begin, which is with my parents. They are the hardest working individuals I know on the planet. They're in their 60s now, and they're still working. My dad actually retired and then went right back to working as a teacher. So he originally was working in corporate America, years and also worked on reserve duty for the Navy. And then once he retired from all that, he went back to work again. So it's they love working. They're well advanced and they're well recognized in their fields, and they both came from very humble beginnings, which is part of why they have worked so hard to change their narrative and change the outcome of all of their efforts in their life. So what I learned from my parents is the value of education and a strong work ethic. I also learned about buying quality things. So, for example, I found a piece of paper in my parents' home. It was my homework from my childhood, probably like second or third grade. I'm not really sure. But I wrote a little story about how I would go to Nordstrom with my mom and we would shop for shoes and things like that from a very young age, because with very humble means, they always made sure that their children got whatever they wanted and grew up differently in a different environment from the one. So and my brother also took on this lesson of really working hard and also spending hard. So my parents do spend their money. They enjoy fancy things. They like that lifestyle. And they also love quality. So they spend money on really high quality goods. Mm-hmm. And I learned that lesson from them, but I abused it, I would say. I definitely spent more than I had the means to spend when I started in my professional life as in corporate America. I had, a six-figure salary and started, buying the clothes, buying the drinks, saying yes to every trip that was offered to me and every experience. And partly that fear of missing out, but also because I just believed I had the means to pay for it. And I did at first, but then I started, saying, maybe I won't pay off the credit card in full this month. And it was a slippery slope. And before I knew it, I was racking up debt and also attaching myself even further to a job that I eventually didn't really love and didn't really inspire me. So even though I was a high earner, I was always feeling scarce and not abundant. I was always feeling like the money that I earned was already spent because I was having to channel it back into debt payments. And this was just something I always knew deep down, but didn't really have an awareness of how much it would impact my life moving forward until I ran into a little blue book in, the end of 2015. I came across Life-Changing Magic of Tidying Up by Marie Kondo. And that's the moment where my whole idea of what organizing really means changed. I had thought I was a person who valued organization and order for the longest time, but I really never took a deeper look at consumption. So while I thought I was organized when I was throwing swap parties for my friends every year and giving away, clothing and things like that by the ton, I really needed to examine why. Why was I giving away this much, this many clothing? Why was I patting myself on the back for this? Why was I glorifying this moment like I was doing something great? So the Life-Changing Magic of Tidying really brought me down to earth and really helped me realize how I was coping with the discomfort that was happening in a career that was really uninspiring me by just shopping and creating clutter. So that's kind of where my story takes a whole different turn, and that's how I got to being the KonMari Consultant that I am today, by following the method that was in that little blue book. And I changed my mindset, I changed my consumption patterns, I changed everything about how I view money and wealth and lifestyle because of just reading one book.
I love your story. And I think there's so many reasons. I don't know if it's just like tidying and finance can fit so well together. And we're going to be talking about that. But it just feels like the work that you do as a KonMari consultant and the work that I do as a money coach, can marry so well together. So I'm just excited to have this conversation even further. I'd love to know, kind of going back to your story, you shared that you felt like your consumption was something that was driving you for a really long time. And then you were would you say that you were spending to hide this dissatisfaction of other aspects of your life?
Definitely, because I would say about year 5 into my corporate career, I looked at my boss, looked at the passion that he had for his job in our industry. And I realized at that very moment that I didn't want to grow any further than where I was, because I didn't want any more of the responsibility that he had and the passion. I didn't have the passion that he had towards the job. So I knew that was a big problem. And I tried different things, all involving money, like going back to school. So at that time, I went back to interior design school, got to get a master's, and I thought that would work. I thought that would fix the problem. But unfortunately, the recession when I graduated, so I wasn't able to do much with that degree, because it was much more stable option to stick with my government contracting job at the time, even though that industry was also hit. The construction and design was hit even harder. So I kept my day job. Some more years passed, and I just sit in front of the computer and click on Amazon, click on Nordstrom, spend hours just looking at clothing. It was a way for me to check out. It was a way for me to get temporary gratification when I would open the box, or know that I snagged something before it went on sale or got bought. But it was really all just a cover up for what I was really feeling, just uninspired and stuck.
And you've shared that, we put things on your credit card and eventually you're like, well, maybe I won't pay the full balance. I think what's really important for a lot of people to understand is a lot of people think that the more income that they make, the more they'll be able to do, the better their life will be. It'll solve all their problems. But you really have stated that you were a 6-figure earner, and that wasn't the case for you. How do you view wealth now, after knowing that like you can make 6 figures and you can still be in debt, and you can still feel like every paycheck that you make isn't really yours?
First of all, this was like kind of the biggest life lesson ever, but just my whole story up to this point. So moving forward, I will never make this mistake again with my money, for sure. And I really didn't understand the difference between being rich and being wealthy until I was in your money program. I had never calculated my net worth. I don't even think I fully understood what it was, and just didn't have that basic financial literacy. Able to budget quite well because I like details and spreadsheets and math and software. But even though I was able to make sure all of those bills got paid, the credit score stayed high, had the income to support that, I was just ignoring the fact that it was a ridiculous amount of interest and ridiculous amounts of like month minimum payments and things even that were going into kind of just trying to be at steady state and make sure everything cleared. So yeah, I had a whole different mindset around it. And I definitely didn't have that going in until I took a deeper look and became more aware.
I want to switch gears a little bit and talk more about your business now, because you do work with so many people and help them tidy their homes. But I feel like even more so than that, you're also helping them tidy their lives. Like there's so much, it goes so much deeper, the connection that we have to things and money and all of that. What has been the biggest aha moment, or even like goal that you've achieved and lesson you've learned from that and working with other people when it comes to tidying, and what that says about people? I feel like that was 100 questions in one, but
yeah. So what I do is essentially use the vehicle of tidying to help someone change their life. And the area of life that they're changing is most obviously their home. But really, by the time we're finished, there's so many other things that come up. In my personal life, when I tidy, I almost immediately, as I said, realized that, wow, it's really my finance that has more clutter than anything else. And then with my clients, they have seen things. They have either broken up with someone else who they love, or have attracted someone new. into their life through or during or very soon after finishing their tidying. Mm-hmm. They have found money in their house. They have found cash or checks that haven't been honored yet, or other things, coupons or those gift certificates, things like that. Mm-hmm. When you put your intent around tidying, like you're saying, hey, like I'm trying to make a change, not only in my home, but in my mind and in my lifestyle. It's way deeper than just shuffling things around or heading out to the Container Store to put a pretty, box around clutter that you don't intend to even look at throughout the life of it being around your space. So now I'm an extension of a home that I honor. I have space that supports me in moving on and moving forward to not paying so much attention to my home. Now my home is saying, hey, I'm all good. You can reach out now and focus on your finances, or maybe lose some clutter that's around your waist, or maybe open yourself up to doing more things in the community. So I would have never put all of the attention that I did on finance if I didn't have my home base set and I didn't have the tool of clutter basically giving me all these clues and showing me that, yeah, this is way more than just putting stuff in the bin. It's about really paying attention to what we value, essentially, and how that manifests in space.
Yeah, I love that. Like, once you realize what you value, I feel like so much more becomes clear. And even so much more becomes clear to you about what you don't value. And that it makes it easier to make decisions. I'm sure when I work with my students, it's like they become clear about what they value and what they don't value when it comes to how they spend their money. For you, when we were working with your clients, it's like what they attract into their life as a whole almost.
Yes. And they often forget the intent of decluttering. So when we hear things like tidying up, organizing, our minds immediately go to what's leaving and what we have to let go of and what we're purging, which is very stressful for people to think about. And people don't even start to get in the first place. But with KonMari, the fundamental question is not what's heading at your door. It's actually what sparks joy for you. So it shifts your attention to what you're keeping and not what you're letting go of. So that's what I love about it. And that's what I love about it even more than philosophies like minimalism, for example, is that it gives you the permission to keep whatever you want to. So for example, I have 58 shoes because I love shoes. I still do. Like, I love shoes. And at first I was reading all these minimalist blogs and interviewing minimalists and trying to explore that concept. And it wasn't sitting with me. It just wasn't right. And I realized that, hey, I love my shoes. They fit into my ideal lifestyle. When I look at them, I don't have decision fatigue. I actually love the collection, and each one of them as individually spark joy. So that works for me. Now in my kitchen, I have 2 cutting knives. That's it. And that aligns with the fact that I do not love to cook. I really don't. I have tried to cook. I had my grandmother, my mother, they are fantastic cooks, and they love baking and they love just nourishing their families with the joy of cooking. But I just did not rub off on me. So, so that kind of balance works for me, and it aligns with my values, which is ultimately all I care about.
I'd love for you to tell us a recent goal that you've achieved, or something you've achieved maybe just even in your past, and how you decided to pursue that goal and how you got there from where you began.
Sure. So a big goal for me was to cut the clutter that followed me into this new lifestyle that was associated with some dark places, as I mentioned, just a lot of feeling of just being stuck, stagnant, not doing what I'm meant to be doing. And that totaled to $60,000 roughly. So it was no small feat to start to, one, even recognize that it had crept up to that large of a number. And then second, actually start to try to pay it off. So
we're talking debt here.
Yes, we're talking consumer debt. Yep. All right. So probably not those, because I'm sure I charge some meals on there, as well as some vacations and things like that. Mindless spending. I had to cut the clutter from my previous life, and how I started to do that was to make the big changes first. Because I'm kind of a go big or go home person. I think that's why I'm so attracted by the KonMari method as well, because it's so against the grain. It's so about like just ripping the Band-Aid and just getting it done efficiently instead of just doing a little bit here, a little bit there. So that's how I went after my debt as well. So I was like, how can I make the biggest shifts first? So I ran into the circumstance of my job letting me go and saying, thank you for your service. I was a contractor, as I mentioned, so we had a bit of a project shift and a budget shift just due to just new administration priorities. And because I had moved 2 years ago from DC area to Chicago, I had a little bit more trouble kind of finding another contract that would be okay with me working virtually. And long story short, my time was up there. And, I thought I was going to be really upset about this, but letting that job go ended up just kind of shifting what my view of security meant. So although like it sounded like how did she pay off her debt when her job was released, it actually released emotions that helped me cut clutter in other areas of my life. And I moved on to letting go of my car. So that was the next step. I realized that, wow, I'm in Chicago now. Transportation's great. I don't really even need a car. And it's kind of complicated parking in Chicago too.
Yeah.
So it was becoming more of a headache to even have a car, and it was sitting in the parking space that I was also paying for at my old apartment for quite a while. So I let it go. And I also sold a rental property. So my first home, so it's slightly mental, purchased that a year after I started working at my first job. And I sold that property because I did have a tenant there, and used the profits from that home to pay down my debt. So those things helped me get, at least of a quarter or more ahead very quickly. And I still have a little ways to go, but I definitely have a plan in place. And just making that initial effort has driven me to not only really push harder to really reach the goal, but it's also opened up the doors to explore different financial independence and your money program. So it's opened up my mind to a lot of different other creative communities that have people who are struggling with the same issues, and they've all helped me and supported me in various ways.
Well, thank you for sharing that. And I love that you say make the big changes first. I might have to make that the title of this podcast episode because it's so true. I think that we get so bogged down in these very expensive ways to live our life. And a lot of times when I'm working with people, it's like, what is one big win that you can capture right now to release yourself from this thing that might be holding you down? And those are two very big changes, is cutting off the car and selling a rental property or your first home that I know can hold a lot of like emotional value there. I want to get your best tips now. So we're going to go into the tangible tips round, because I would love to know what your 3 biggest tangible tips are on implementing KonMari or other tidying methods with money, or even other aspects of the lives of our listeners, and what would have the biggest impact on them.
Cool. So what you can probably tell is that I love the intersection between KonMari and finances. So I actually thought really hard about this and narrowed it down to like 3 ways you can KonMari and apply the same exact tip to your finances as well. There's so much overlap, but I narrowed it down to just 3. So the first is a tip straight from KonMari. Actually, I'll take a step back. When people hear KonMari and they've seen it somewhere in popular culture out there in mainstream media, and I ask them, what is the first step? They say, oh, you have to like bring all of your stuff out and take everything out of your closets, right? That's the first step to KonMari. And actually, the first step to KonMari is actually to define your ideal lifestyle and ideal living environment. And it's the step that everyone forgets. Everyone. Like I would say over 90% of the people that have either read the book or seen it somewhere in media forget this step. And it's a big reason why a lot of people fall back into old patterns or can't complete the entire tidying event. because they have nothing to lean on. They don't understand their why. They can't answer the question, should I keep this or does this spark joy? Because they don't have a context for it or anything to ground them. So that's what that first step is, imagining your vision essentially. And that's where we start when we're thinking about organizing and tidying. And I feel like the same applies when we're thinking about finances. So we've talked a lot, Tess, about mindset and how important that is when it comes to finance. And so we have to have a goal for where we're going. We have to be thinking from a place from abundance. We have to think, a year ahead and maybe even 5 to 10 steps ahead of where we want to be financially. And so establishing our vision is very important before we jump in to try to cut down on debt or increase our income. Mm-hmm. So that's my number one tip. And then my number 2 tip is to confront clutter. So in KonMari, that's kind of an early step, is to actually confront and be aware of the things that you may have stuffed away in bins or packed in the back of your closet. Take it all out. And I say closet just because we start with clothing, but there's many other categories that follow. Mm-hmm. And so self-awareness, self-care, that's what this exercise essentially is. It's not as glamorous as eating chocolate or going to get your nails done. It's similar to what we do in finance, which is confront our spending. So the first thing you had me do in the money program, Tess, was to lay out in a spreadsheet all of the different things I spend my money on. And this is something we can easily hide away from ourselves, right? Mm-hmm. So similar to clutter. So so I found a lot of overlap there, confronting, being aware. And so that's why I would recommend step 2. Now, step 3 is to record and reward yourself for the small wins and losses. So this is what I encourage my clients to do while I'm working with them. I take pictures of their progress. I remind them of their vision. I talk about the lessons that they've learned, the aha moments that they've had throughout the journey. Because so many start with me and just want to get to the end as fast as possible, even though when I ask them how long they have felt like they've been unorganized or clutter, they usually say all their life. But they think because of this, kind of culture that we're in where everything is instant gratification, that this is a process that will just happen in a snap. So I think that's something that's really important, to actually enjoy the journey and the small wins and the small losses. I did the same when it came to finances. So as I was paying the debt down, I would definitely track the debt in a tracker, one that I just did analog with pen and paper, a little graph that I made just to reward myself.
Sometimes that's the best way.
Yeah. It was very exciting to look at that little chart. And I would also really get in the weeds and write down small things that I was doing. So if I called the power company to dispute a charge that didn't make sense, or if I made sure to follow up on a rebate, or I took a coupon to a store, those things seem arbitrary, but these are all things that I used to just ignore. So the fact that I was even paying attention to these things was a huge mindset shift for me. And it was really helpful to write them all down, as well as like really the losses too. So any missteps that I have, I would write down, because I know that I'm always going to be tempted to fall into old patterns. So the same applies there. We're enjoying the journey, because honestly, even when it comes to clutter, the end game, the end point, that, paying the last dollar of debt or paying or touching the last item in your house and making the final decision, they're kind of anticlimactic, right? When you get to the end, you're kind of like, okay, now what's next? Because it's ultimately really about the journey. It's not so much about the end point, but even though that's what we think is going to give us the most satisfaction in the beginning. I felt the same way when I finished the writing event. I was like, oh, okay, I guess I'm done. Well, I'll move on to something else now. So, but thinking back on all the interesting things that were happening during that whole experience is what I truly ultimately need to remember. And same goes for this whole path to paying off debt and moving towards really thinking about wealth longer term.
Well, and I also feel like that third point is really important to really truly experience and kind of almost develop that muscle memory and remember what it is you need to do. Because I feel like both with tidying your literal clutter and tidying your financial clutter, it's also a constant thing that you need to keep up on. So although, yeah, you can become debt free and you can like stop having clutter in your house, you also have to continuously kind of not necessarily battle, but I guess defend your space and defend your finances, or maybe your ability to go into debt so that it doesn't happen all over again.
Exactly. It's an ongoing process. And even with decluttering, when you finish, you have to be you don't have to be, you actually are trained now to be way more conscious of what comes in and out of your home and what you surround yourself with and who you surround yourself with. But when those life changes happen, just like it can with finances, when you have emergencies or shifts where you have to support someone else or you get married, it's same thing with cluttering. When all those transitions happen, there's always temptation to fall back on old patterns, to swipe a charge on the credit card instead of taking it out of an emergency fund, or to buy, 3 different carriers for your child, when you are trying to prepare for a new child, or maybe avoiding some conversations with someone who is entering your space through marriage, and you're melding together 2 different ideals and 2 different potentially clutter situations. It always is something, it's approach. So that's why I call my time with my clients active tidying lessons, because I'm teaching them something while we're actively practicing tidying. And they always have it within them for them to apply it to the future situations that they're, of course, going to run into, because we all have clutter somewhere. And whether it shows up in physical form or emotional form, it's always there.
All right. I would love to continue this deep conversation on clutter and finances, but we have to wrap this up. So we're going to go into the quick and dirty Q&A round. And the first question I always like to start this round off with is a little bit of a confession, because and yours can even be like a embarrassing cluttering move, or if you want to share a money one, that's cool too. But if you have a cluttering one, since you are the tidying expert, then maybe you would prefer to share. I always like to get like the money experts to share their stupid money moves, because it just kind of like brings down the barriers a little bit. So I think it's always fun to share, like, you know what? We're all human here. We all make our mistakes. So what confession do you have for us today?
Well, an embarrassing money move would definitely be around gym memberships, for sure. I think at one time I thought that because I'm paying for it, I'm going to be motivated to go. And I realized that that's actually not a motivating factor for me. I'm really, really good at making excuses about why I can't get out of bed and get to the gym. So I have made mistakes in the past with locking myself into various memberships that I never actually used. Sometimes I would use for a certain point or a period of time, but then maybe would just ignore. So I've definitely made a lot of mistakes in that area that have cost me. And now I just try to, since it's so beautiful here in the summer times in Chicago, I just try to work out outside as much as I can, or just walk. Or now I actually pick up clutter in my community as exercise, just because seeing clutter outside also bothers me. So I've turned it around, but I'm still a little nervous, because eventually when it gets cold here, I really do love group classes, but I just have trouble getting there. So I have to make sure I don't lock myself into any contracts, maybe do like something that's not so binding, so I can make sure that nothing goes wasted.
Okay, well, eye for an eye, as when someone shares their confession, I have to share mine. Today I want to share like a clutter confession, because I feel like I have plenty of those. I recently had to downsize because of moving to Italy, but I'm sure you probably run into this all the time. But so my parents still have their home in in Iowa that I grew up in. I actually lived in it my entire life. So I still have my same bedroom, same everything. And my mom and I have like attempted to clean it out, and we'll like declutter a ton of stuff. And it is just so packed full of memories. And my mom, bless her heart, she also just can't get rid of anything. So maybe I need you to come declutter our house. But yeah, my childhood bedroom still pretty much looks like my childhood bedroom, as if I still live in it. I could probably move home today, not bring any of my stuff, and be just fine.
Well, that inspired me to share my clutter confession as well. I do have a couple of things at my parents' house in their basement. They have plenty space over there, but I still feel bad that I'm even taking up just a little bit of their home with my stuff. But it's just stuff that doesn't make sense for me right now, but definitely fits into my future goals and lifestyle. Yeah, so I do still have a box at my parents' house that I very intentionally went through and left there with the understanding that, you know, in the future, I will bring it into a different space in this season of my life. So I think it's okay as long as you get permission and it sparks joy for your parents to get there, right?
I think it like sparks enormous heartache for my mom to think of getting rid of any of my stuff. So I have a box. It's just like, it's a box the size of a room. And my mom is happy to have it there, but we need to get rid of it. Okay, let's move on. That was not very quick, but it was dirty.
Sorry, not very quick.
What is one non-negotiable money indulgence that you refuse to cut from your budget?
Tess, you probably remember because I think we talked about this in the money program, but I definitely held on to the self-care practice of going and getting my nails done by a professional. I really had a hard time thinking about letting that go. I wouldn't have in past years, but in this year in particular, I realized how much I use my hands on a daily basis and how much I look at my hands, especially when I'm actively tidying with clients. And so it's important for me to keep them very healthy because if I'm not actively tidying, I'm actively on my laptop as well. So I just had to keep that in the budget. It's definitely still an indulgent. I recognize that because obviously I could just go pick up some polish from somewhere and, you know, some tools and things like that and do it myself. But it never turns out as nice as it does when the professionals do it. And if I have to stare at it all day, I want it to be well done and I want to make sure I keep my hands healthy. All
right, Kristyn, share your best book, tool, or app, whatever you have to recommend, money or KonMari, whatever you have, the first thing that comes to mind.
Sure. Well, in terms of finances, definitely Personal Capital is one that helped me much better understand net worth, and YNAB was another that I've been using for quite some time. Do I use YNAB accurately and correctly like it's intended to use? Maybe not, but I do see the potential of where it's trying to get people to rethink how we think of budgets and spending and money. But I do use it quite regularly just to simply balance some things and my accounts personally. The one that I've used the most, that's what I kind of thought about when I thought about tools I would recommend at the moment, is actually a tracker. And a tracker allows you to actually track your time spent doing things. So for me, I just use it in the business context. So I track how much time I take to work on my website redesign or how much time I take to follow up with clients. And I have various tasks set up. So I just push a button when I start and then I push it again when I'm done. And it helps me really understand where my time is going. It helps me be super prepared if I ever need to hand a task off to someone else to then take over. I can already know like how long it's supposed to take. And it just helps me keep focused too, because if I have to turn the tracker off, that means I also have to probably take a break before I shift to my mind to, you know, the next task.
Fantastic. All right. Tell us where we can find you so we can keep in touch.
You can find me at fortheloveoftidy.com. I offer 30-minute consultations regarding any and everything KonMari. So if you're on the fence about hiring a professional, or you're just feeling stuck when it comes to implementing tidying or just getting organized in general, I welcome any of your listeners to head over to fortheloveoftidy.com and sign up for a free joy call with me. And if you are really, really super into KonMari, or you just want to learn more in general what this is all about without like reading the book, maybe you're into podcasts, I'm assuming, if you're listening to Tess, definitely head over to sparkjoypodcast.com. I co-host a podcast that's about any and everything KonMari, but it's not just an organizing show. We also talk about and talk with guests that are just sparking joy in their lives, just like Tess. Tess was a guest on our show. So we talk about finances as well as tidying.
Yes, it was so much fun to talk about the two together. Kristyn, thank you so much for coming on. It was so fun to hear from you, hear your story, hear you share your transparent challenges and your big wins. And I just love hearing so many great tips, especially when it comes to tidying, and especially how you related it to finances. So thank you.
Thank you, Tess. This was great.
And that's a wrap on episode number 76 of the Wander Wealthy podcast with my guest, Kristyn Ivey. Now, you all know if you want to get to the show notes, get any of the links, and, check out Kristyn's website, you can do so by going to wanderwealthypodcast.com/podcast/episode 76. That is the number 76. I'd also want to mention first, if you're interested in the money program, the program Kristyn personally went through, where she really was able to tidy her finances and learn a lot about her priorities and just become more aware of the flow of money in her life, then you can head to wanderwealthy.com/TMP, short for the money program. Obviously, I will also link that in the description of this episode so you can check it out. It's my 6-week program where I basically take you through my money coaching modules. So if I was to sit down and work with you one-on-one, these are a bulk of the things that we would do to get your finances in order, from budgeting to debt payoff to investing and all the good stuff in between. So go ahead, check that out. And my last request of you is to make sure, if you haven't, and especially if you're new to this podcast, to leave us a rating and a review on iTunes. So head to your iTunes store, search for the podcast, search for the Wander Wealthy podcast, and leave me a rating and a review. It really helps the show get more ears, and it helps us just get seen by the masses of people who also want to wander wealthy too. So that's all I have for you today. Until next time, I hope you wander wealthy.